disable that. Okay. So, a lot happened last time we read. Yoon almost killed, was very close to killing, Heiran. She tried meditating and she only saw a memory of Karuk, but she couldn't talk to Karuk, so that was a bummer. And then, since the political climate is very intense in this town, there has been more conflict where someone basically said a fuck you to the Fire Lord and was basically like, we want Shaijin to be Fire Lord instead. And then there was a whole brawl. A lot of people were injured. Oh yeah, the brawl happened, which then left Heiran defenseless because everyone went to the brawl. And then Yoon almost killed her. But she's okay now. And now Kyoshi has kidnapped. I'm gonna basically say kidnapped. Lady Huwaso, who is the mother of Lord Shaijin. Okay, so let me just put my thing right there. Put that there. Also, I might be stopping a lot because my finger is like flaring up a lot. Feels very uncomfortable, so if you hear any, like, I know you can't hear that, but if you happen to hear me shaking my hand, it's because, you know, my fingers don't feel good. Okay, so wow, we are 100 and probably 108 pages away from being done. So let me see where I want to stop. That's a lot of reading, but I think I could do it. All right. Let me get my chapstick on my lips, and we shall begin. Oh, cool. Okay. Alrighty. So, the first chapter, the next chapter is called. Wait, hold on, just 1 second. Forgot to do a very important thing before I began. Okay. So, the next chapter is called, well, it took me 6 minutes just to read. Jesus. Okay. The next chapter is called The Companion. The Companion. I'm hungry, Huazo said. If Kyoshi could keep only one lesson she'd learned in her 17 or so years of life, it was that your choice of traveling companions was the most important decision you could ever make. Forget the avatars roaming the world with their bending teachers. The avatars roam the world with the few select people they didn't want to strangle with their bare hands mid-journey. For the last time, there's parched grain in the sack. For the last time, there's parched grain in the sack you've been using as a pillow, Kyoshi said. And nothing else? And nothing else? And nothing else. She also made a noise with her teeth. She opened the bag and poured some toasted millet into her palm. Then she tossed it into her mouth, crunching the grain more noisily than Kyoshi expected from a refined noblewoman. Shiryu and I used to fight like this when we traveled, she said. He loved the idea of being close to nature, so he always packed as little as possible on our trips. If he had his way, there would have been no guards at all in our procession. Just the two of us and what we could carry, tromping through the wilderness and tromping through. Gross. Hate that so much. Tromping through the wilderness of the islands. The thought of Lady Huazo and the deceased Fire Lord camping outdoors, like the Flying Opera Company and their meals of elephant rat, was so incongruous that Kyoshi's curiosity got the better of her. You and he really used to rough it? Huazo shrugged. You look so skeptical. Any pastime feels like the most glorious adventure when you're young and in love. Fleeing into the mountains was how we escaped the pressures of the court. What happened? He also knew Kyoshi was pushing it and answered anyway. What happened was we were young and merely in love. What are those compared to the pressures of clan and country? Nothing. At some point, whether it was a suggestion planted in his head by his advisors or an idea he came up on his lonesome, Lord Shiryu became convinced he could do better than me. She picked a husk out of her teeth and flicked it to the side. It could have been about power, politics. Fortunes rise and fall quicker here in the Fire Nation than in the stagnant Earth Kingdom, Avatar. In those days, the Sawan were weak, and I wasn't well received in the capital as the Fire Lord's mistress. There are certain ways members of the royal family were supposed to meet their future partners, and falling in love as teenagers doesn't count. Lady Huazo Huazo lay back against the saddle edge and took out her hand, and held out her hand. Water. Kyoshi was so enthralled by the story that she forgot to snap at Huazo for being such a demanding hostage. She handed over the water skin, and Huazo swigged it until it was empty. The millet really dries out your mouth, she said. Anyway, where was I? Oh yes, the worst moment of my life. Sheiryu's ministers, a lot of them being Naka clan, mind you, arranged the whole thing like an assassination. It was at one of those blasted, wretched, miserable garden parties. Shiryu had already been thinking about ending our relationship, but he wasn't sure about it. But not until his advisors trotted out Lady Sulan of the Kaoso clan before him. The woman Shiryu married, Kyoshi thought, Zoryu's mother. I was watching his face when it happened, Huazo said. I saw the exact moment Shiryu laid eyes on her, and thoughts of me vanished from his head. The pieces fell into place for the Fire Lord. He had the excuse, the permission to make that ultimate sacrifice, and let go of his love for me. I saw how wide his grin grew when he realized he could pursue the lovely young Sulan and be completely blameless in the eyes of our country. Huaza smiled and with one corner of her mouth and frowned with the other. He could have fought in his heart a little more, if it was his inevitable and unfortunate duty to cut me loose. He could have done it a little more solemnly, instead of wearing that big, stupid, dumbstruck face he used to reserve only for me. She remembered an important part of the story and giggled. It was an unfortunate time to be pregnant with his first son. You can imagine Sheiryu's embarrassment when I told him. Kyoshi wondered if she ever faced it. Yeah, me too. Cause damn, that really sucks. And be like, hey, I'm pregnant too. Just so you know, I know you're leaving me, but hey, I'm pregnant. Hella sucks. And to not be liked by the court already, that's just like, you know you're not gonna get in. And now you have a baby in you. Very nice. Yeah, no, me too. I'm sympathizing with her too. Kyoshi wondered if she ever phrased it like that in front of Sheijin, and what her son thought if she did. Parents had ways of offhandedly cutting their children. So you've been taking it out on the Kyoso ever since. What? No! Huazo scoffed. You make me sound so petty. I dedicated myself to growing the fortunes of the Sawan because that's what clan leaders do. And I was one of the best in our history. You think the other nobles don't try to edge their rivals out or dream of having their offspring sitting on the throne? Every single family of sufficient birth has wanted to own this country since Taz. Your precious Seinaka women would go for it if they had the strength. Lady Huazo seemed to enjoy how the Avatar incorrectly dwelled on the level of personal. Huazo seemed to enjoy how the Avatar incorrectly dwelled on the level of personal grudges, like a child. I never hated little Sulan, she said. She was too pure for court. If you want to hear a story that If you want to hear a story about what she was like, listen. She traced she traced a character on the floor of the saddle with her finger. The elegance in her penmanship clear to see even without ink. She did it upside down too, so Kyoshi could read it right side up. An underrated but extremely impressive feat. The character was Zo, sometimes pronounced So, and it meant ancestor. For generations, the characters for Zo have been used for names by the Saowan and only the Saowan. Uh, oh, I see where this is going. I see where this is going. Because Zoryu, and she's talking about the letter for Zo. Oh, shit. That is some tea. That is some brisk tea right there, ma'am. If that's where she's heading, then goddamn. Okay. Yeah, I see it too. For generations, the character for Zo has been used for names by the Saowan and only the Saowan, who also explained. But it's the same as the one in Zoryu. Chiryu gave another woman's child my family's character for his name. Kyoshi sucked in her breath. See? Who also said, even you, a foreigner, understand. Agni Kais have been fought to death for lesser insults, but Chiryu did it because Sulon wanted to, and Sulon wanted to because she thought it sounded pretty. He bowed to her nonsensical whims, and in doing so, angered an entire clan. Oh, fuck. Because she thought it was pretty. Yeah. Oof. She threw her shoulders higher. Me, personally, I was less upset about the insult than I was shocked. Completely staggered that Sulon didn't understand it would be a bad idea. How could the future Fire Lady be so naive? How much damage was she going to cause with her foolishness? Who also tapped her chest with her hand, her fingers crooked like the claw of a raven eagle. We could have had a fire leader who actually knew how to use power. I could have brought success and prosperity to the rest of the country like I did for the Saowan. And I could have a great mentor in you. And I could have had a great mentor in you. Kyoshi couldn't help but think about this teacher that had withered on the vine, where she had no reason to come into conflict with Huazo. The Avatar and the Fire Lady, working together as allies. Cheijin is your second chance at the throne. Cheijin is your second chance at the throne, she said. He's nothing more than your way of reclaiming what should have been. Cheijin is my son and I love him, Huazo snapped indignantly. But yes, him taking the crown from Sulon's progeny would rectify a few mistakes of the past. At the cost of plunging the nation into war, you can claim not to hate Zoryu and Sulon all you want, but your actions don't follow your words. The leader of the Saowan smirked. Maybe you're right. It's so hard to keep personal matters out of our duties, isn't it, Avatar? The mask slid back over Huazo's face, hiding the candor she shared so openly moments before. I still don't know anything about Yan or Was it, or was it Yao? I can't remember. Thank you for making this easier, Kyoshi thought as Capital Island came into view. Take a left, she said to Junpei. I'll need to guide you the rest of the way. They landed on a rocky coastline. The first view of First Lord's Harbor the view of First Lord's Harbor blocked by jutting promontories. Here, the waters were too dangerous for boats to dock or even linger. Powerful waves slammed into the near vertical cliffs, creating a deafening hiss. The only sign of human interference was a small hut nestled into a crag. Kyoshi had to rely on a faint memory of a written description to find it. I thought we were going to the palace, Huazu said. We will, Kyoshi replied. Eventually. There were no stairs or pathways to the house from the cliffs above or the waters below. A visitor would need a bison or have an extremely skilled bender in order to reach it. Jinpa brought Yin Yang down as far as he could, but there wasn't enough space to land. Kyoshi earthbent a ramp so Huazo could disembark. Go inside, she said. Make yourself comfortable. There should be more preserved food in it. There should be more preserved food and fresh water, but I doubt you'll need it. We'll be back in less than 2 hours. Huazu sniffed in confusion and disgust at the house. It was covered in a thick layer of seabird droppings. You're not going to guard me? Where could you go? Kyoshi said. Being ordered inside this strange, unexplained house that existed in defiance of logistics unsettled Huazo for the first time since Kyoshi had met the woman. But she refused to show weakness. Well, it's not an Ember Island bungalow, but it'll do. She fought past her hesitation and marched across the bridge. Kyoshi and Jinpa watched her proceed carefully inside, perhaps checking for traps. Once she disappeared from view, he turned to Kyoshi. That was an incredible story she told you, she said. Are you two friends now? I don't think so. Good. It would be difficult if you suddenly became fond of Huazu. Again, he showed the lack of a typical airbender's scruples. By all rights, she should have had to lock him to the ground alongside Rangi. Instead, he was enabling her the same way the Salwan were doing for Yoon. Jinpa, she said, how long have you been traveling with me as my secretary and advisor? He scratched the top of his head. He hadn't shaved in a while, and his hair was starting to grow back. Well, I don't remember the date we made it official, but I suppose you could start counting from when you first had to leave the Southern Air Temple to mop up the splinter fleet of the Fifth Nation before they could reform. Then we went to the Misty Palms and ran into that problem with the beetle-headed merchants and their mercenaries. By the time you destroyed the Emerald Claws, people knew they should go through me to talk to you. Kyoshi nodded. She could count each of those adventures through the scars on her body, up to and including the raid on Long Cow. Brutal business, all of it. And yet, not once have you ever advised me to follow the path of peace. Let me say it again. Brutal business, all of it. And yet, not once have you ever advised me to follow the path of peace. Junpa stuffed his tongue under his lower lip. He looked away from her. You've seen me take a lot of punishment, Kyoshi said. But you've always seen me inflict a great deal of it, and you've said nothing. How odd for an air nomad. I don't believe that simple deference to the Avatar is what's keeping you quiet as you watch me violate your spiritual values over and over again. She had caught him out. She might not have she might not have had the specifics, but she'd caught him out just the same. It's as you suspect, Jinpa said. I'm an air nomad, but I'm also something else. I belong to another community. Your friends you play Pai Sho with? Yes. The senior members of the group agreed I should help you establish your avatarhood in whatever way I can, even if your actions go against what I've been taught as an airbender. He rubbed the back of his head, uncomfortable with revealing so much. Having two identities means I serve two different ideals, which is probably why I'm not very good at either. Sometimes those beliefs come into conflict with each other. Kyoshi was of Earth Kingdom and air nomad parentage. She was the bridge between spirits and humans, a public figure and a Dao Fei. Her own half-status made it easier to understand others who were torn in different directions. I know what air nomads believe, she said. What's the other idea? What's the other ideal? The philosophies of beauty and truth. It doesn't sound so different from airbender teachings at first blush, but to uphold such values requires a deep attachment and love for the greater world than enlightened air nomads are supposed to have. Some of my friends in the other nations would argue that, on occasion, truth and beauty must be defended with ugliness. They would claim a gardener who nurtures a flower so others can enjoy it bloom for a few moments must spend much time with her hands buried in the dirt. Kyoshi would have chosen a less pleasant word than dirt. What do you believe then? Jinpa smiled sadly. I believe I have to make peace with my own choices, just like everyone else. The tint of the pain of his expression reminded her too much of Kelsang for her to believe Jinpa was at complete peace with himself. Outsiders enviously and condescendingly assumed airbenders lived in a state of innocent bliss, but that didn't give the monks and nuns enough credit for their inner strength. From what Kyoshi knew, belonging to the Wandering Nation meant a constant struggle with your own morals against the world's. She didn't ask him to name his group. She'd rather a secret society try to help her for once, instead of coming after her with hatchets. Perhaps after all this is done, I can be less confrontational and start compromising more, Kyoshi said. She could stand to make her long-suffering secretary's life, she could stand to make her long-suffering secretary's life a little easier. He deserved it. Jinpa glanced at the house where Lady Huazo was resting inside. I think we're both compromised now. I think we're both compromised now. To the palace? To the palace. And that is the end of that chapter. Okay. On to the next chapter. The next chapter is called The next chapter is called The Edge. The Edge. You kidnapped the leader of the Salwon clan? Zoryu's cry of shock echoed through the war room. Luckily, the only ones to hear it were Kyoshi, Jinpa, and the multitude of carved dragons wrapped around the pillars and walls. She'd asked the Fire Lord to dismiss his retinue, and then asked him again to dismiss the unseen lurking guards who had undoubtedly doubled in number since Yoon's attack. She had briefed him on everything that happened in North Chungling, but the details had only made Zoryu more upset. You were supposed to help me prevent a war, not create one from whole cloth. We are preventing a war. The Salwon have been working with Yoon. Once we make the connection public, you can deal with them as honorless traitors. No amount of manipulating public opinion or court etiquette or claiming it's really the Kyoso's fault can excuse them. Kyoshi reiterated the plan. It wasn't very complicated. Get me Seijin, and I'll get you a confession. Zoryu's map flapped open and shut. Kyoshi knew what was happening. The time had come for the Fire Lord to make his move, and even in the face of his own destruction, he couldn't do it. Didn't want to do it. Whether it was the weakness he'd shown when it came to his brother, or a lack of resolve in general, he couldn't sign the picture that Kyoshi had sketched, inked, and colored in for him. She surged forward and grabbed Zoryu by the shoulders. Manhandling the Fire Lord was probably punishable by death, but right now, Kyoshi could only see a scared young person whose weakness was going to get everyone killed. She saw herself, and she hated it. You have to be stronger, she said. And she could have been talking into a mirror. We have to be stronger. Our opponents in this game are playing for blood, and they're willing to break every rule. We have to break a few as well. Kyoshi, if this doesn't work, I'll have only hastened my own demise. Zoryu might have had his political troubles, but he hadn't lost everything yet. He was still a relative newcomer to a life on the brink. Hold on just 1 second. Where was I? Okay. He was still a relative newcomer to a life on the brink. If one path of a fork promised you oblivion, it didn't really matter what the other path held in store. There's a saying among the destitute of the Ba Sing Se lower ring, Kyoshi said. The ones who were so poor that if they find a copper piece in the street, they take it straight to the gambling dens and the numbers rackets, because a single coin won't make a difference in their survival. You either accept the risk of winning or the guarantee of losing. She let the words sink in. Now, can you get me, Chaejin? Yes or no? Zoryu worked his jaw around nothing again, and she fought the urge to slap him, but like a newborn turtle duck taking its first waddling steps into the water, he nodded. I'll have to bring in a few people, and I don't think I can trust them all to keep their mouths shut. So you won't have much time before word leaks out, but I'll make that happen. Be quick about it. I'll wait in my quarters for your signal. She turned to leave the war room without waiting to be dismissed. Avatar, Zoryu said, calling her attention back. His eyes burned with more light than she'd seen from him yet. If the royal portrait artists wanted to capture Zoryu's likeness for the ages, they could do worse than choosing this moment. I may not be the strongest ruler yet, he said. He already sounded clearer and backed with purpose. But I will do anything for the sake of the Fire Nation. Please understand that. She gave him a nod, the gesture of two people about to take a plunge into uncharted depths together. I really have to thank you, Avatar, Shaijin said, his words slightly muffled by the burlap sack covering his head. Damn. He sat across from Kyoshi in the back of Yongyong's saddle. You've grown my legend in ways I couldn't dream of. Wrongfully accused, forced to bear the injustice of men while being blessed by the spirits, history will turn my reign into a song for the ages. Zoryu's agents had found Shaijin so willing to comply with his own abduction that they hadn't bothered to gag or restrain him. The nondescript men wearing the clothing of junior ministers told Kyoshi they'd simply asked him to leave the tea house where they found him, and get into their carriage. They passed through the winding street to the capital like a noble, and a few of his household retainers. Let me say that again. They passed through the winding street to the capital like a noble and a few of his household retainers on a joyride to the isolated meadows surrounding the outskirts of the city. Only once, when they'd opened the door to the carriage and let Shaijin step out, did they throw the bag over the top of his head as she'd requested. And they did it so clumsily that Shaijin had gotten a good look at Kyoshi and Jinpa waiting with Yingyang. He had given her a knowing grin before his face disappeared under the hood. I do have one complaint, though, Shaijin said, sniffing. What is that abominable smell? Seabird droppings, Kyoshi said. Ah, I knew we were near the ocean. It's hard to tell what direction we went in. I've never traveled by air before. Kyoshi yanked the hood off his head, which he could have done himself but chose not to in his desire to fully embrace the role of suffering captive. Jinpa pulled his bison down, level with the platform the hut stood on. Lovely, Shaijin sneered. Is this the Avatar's private residence in the Fire Nation? In a way, Kyoshi said. It used to belong to Master Jianzu of the Earth Kingdom. Now I own it. She leaned closer to his ear. Your mother's inside. To Shaijin, it was a sudden tangent, and he laughed. Very funny, Avatar. Do you and I have business here or not? Kyoshi violently ripped away the foundations of the hut with earthbending. Planks and splinters flew into the air like they'd been caught in a tornado. Shit. Yeah, Kyoshi violently ripped away the foundations of the hut with earthbending. Planks and splinters flew into the air like they'd been caught in a tornado. Kawazu, suddenly revealed, screamed in surprise. Mother! Mother? Shaijin tried to reach for her, but Kyoshi hadn't made a ramp this time. The gap between Yingyang's saddle and the stone platform was too far for him to leap across. Oh, kill them both. No, he's gonna confess this way. They were, however, close enough for everyone to hear each other. What is the meaning of this? Huazo shouted. I told you I don't know where Yoon is! So now you remember his name, Kyoshi said. She slashed one of her hands at the cliffside. Cracks ran around the rock Huazu stood on, puffing out thin lines of dust. The entire platform lurched, threatening to plunge into the sea. Shaishin threw his arms out in a panic, as if he could control the earth himself. No, stop! Kyoshi, what are you doing? Jinpa shouted. I thought you were just going to scare them a little. Their airbender's shock was real, and not an act put on to convince the Sawan. She hadn't told Jinpa how far she was truly willing to go. She didn't quite know herself. Where is Yoon? Kyoshi didn't care whether Huazu and Shaishin told her. One of them had to know. You've been working with him this whole time in the palace and in North Chungling. Admit it. Where is he? The stone supporting Huazu dropped another foot. Kyoshi, that's enough, Jinpa said. He gathered the reins to fly them away. Don't, she ordered Jinpa. I might lose control over the stone. One wrong move could send Lady Huazu plummeting into the sea. We don't know where Yoon is, Shaishin cried. We've never dealt with him. The denial sent Kyoshi into a rage. With her one hand, she grabbed him by the throat and angled him over the saddle railing. Now both of the Sawan threatened to fall. Let my son go, you monster! Huazo shrieked on her hands and knees. Huazo shrieked on her hands and knees. Viper! Animal! Kyoshi would know those things if Kyoshi would be those things if necessary. I'm only going to ask one more time, she said, and in her heart she knew it was no exaggeration. She had lost patience, her honor, her friend. She had reached her limits. She was done, finally done, and unless Huazo or Shaishin answered, they would be too. Where is Yoon? Kyoshi! Kill them both! Kill him! Kill him! But yeah. Kill! I don't even know what they're gonna do, man. I don't know what she's gonna do. I don't think she's gonna kill them. Probably not. Or, I don't know, man. Maybe? Kyoshi! She shook her head in confusion. She normally didn't hear Karuk's voice so clearly. His husky growl pierced through the roar of the waves, the whistling of the wind. Kyoshi, this isn't who you are. Shaishin raised his tear-stained face and wailed in helplessness. It was the same cry the little girl in Long Kao had made, watching her parents dragged into the street. Maybe Kyoshi had cried like that once, when she watched a bison fly away from Yokia, never to return. Fuck off, Karuk. This isn't a good time. This is a really bad time. Can you call back later? Yep. Maybe Kyoshi had cried like that once, as she watched a bison fly away from Yokia, never to return. Sobbing, Huazu crawled to the edge of the cliff and reached for her son. It was a fruitless gesture, but she'd be that much closer to her child, whom she loved more than her life. Kyoshi finally saw the truth, bare and stripped open. They didn't know where Yoon was. They hadn't been working with him. In her frenzy, she had nearly killed mother and son in front of each other. She tossed Shaishin onto the platform beside her mother, Uh, she tossed Chejin on the platform beside his mother before she accidentally throttled him. She could hear Jianzu laughing in his ear. She could hear Jianzu laughing in her ear. Or maybe it was Kelsang weeping over the loss of his daughter, his betrayal of his example. She pulled out her fans, eliciting whimpers from Huazo and Chejin. Another sharp crack of rock rang out. Instead of heralding a landslide, the entire crag they were on rose higher, riding the edge of the rock wall toward the sky. Without needing to be told, Jinpa climbed Yin Yang on the air, keeping pace with Kyoshi's earthbending. You're still weak. Damn. Nah, this is Mercy. Kyoshi is still kind of 17, 18 right now. Come on, man. Give her a break. I know, fucking Karuk, though. He had to interfere. Kyoshi's still my girl. Hell yeah. She touched, without needing to be told, Jinpa climbed Yin Yang in the air, keeping pace with Kyoshi's earthbending. The platform stopped at the top of the cliff, leaving the Salwon level with the wind-scrubbled field of coarse grasses. Go, she ordered them. Go! They crawled away at first, not trusting the steadiness of the ground or her sudden change in disposition. Then Huazo and Chejin began to believe they might yet survive. They picked themselves up and ran, the pounding of their feet clumsy and unpracticed. The flatness of the cliff tops meant Kyoshi. Yeah, the flatness of the cliff tops meant Kyoshi could see them for as long as she wanted. Watching them take part of the most humbling, equalizing ritual, the fight for one's life, made them look vanquished and small. Kyoshi turned around, unable to stomach the sight any longer. She teetered to the edge of the saddle, dropped to her knees, and retched emptiness into the ocean. Kyoshi! Jinpa dropped his reins and clambered into the saddle with her. He grabbed her by the shoulders, wondering if she was still maddened. Get a hold of yourself! She tried to apologize for risking so much on this desperate, ugly, vile gambit, and coming away empty-handed, for being so completely and utterly wrong about the connection between Yoon and Salwan, for almost making him complicit with her crime. But she was only capable of producing halting gasps. Saying she was incoherent, Jinpa got back in the driver's position and flew them away, making a straight line for the capital. Kyoshi refused to look over the rails below. If she did, she would see Huazo and Chejin moving in the same direction. She'd forced them to their lowest state and terrified them down to their bones. If only that were the end, the conclusion of the Avatar's dealings with the Salwan. How convenient it would be if giving someone enough come up and silence them for good. But eventually they were going to make it back to their kinsmen, and not long after, the royal court itself. Huazo and Shaijin would spread word of what happened. The story of their treatment by Zoryu and the Avatar would be used as just cause for the war. Kyoshi had not only fanned the flames, she'd thrown oil onto the blaze. She thought of Yoon playing Paisho. I don't think she'll do that. I'm pretty sure she's not going to do that. But yeah, you can dream. Hold on just a second. It is my fucking ring finger that keeps on being like, I'm gonna be irritated and you're not gonna like it. Okay. Hopefully that's better. Alright, yeah. She thought of Yoon playing Paisho with Heiran and how he'd predicted the end of their game. How Heiran had all but clasped his hands. How Heiran had all but clasped. Yeah, how Heiran had all but clasped his hand over the board in agreement. If only she could see so far ahead, read a board and know where the final tiles would fall. But instead, she was walled in from every side. To her, the future was an impenetrable blankness, where she'd faltered. Where she'd faltered, injured, and yeah, to her, the future was an impenetrable blankness, where she'd faltered, injured, and made things worse with every step. Not only was she the loser of the game, it had been a mistake for her to ever play. And that is the end of that chapter. Okay. Oh. This one seems interesting. This next chapter is called The Shapes of Life and Death. Yeah, The Shapes of Life and Death. By the time they arrived at the palace, Kyoshi was a shivering wreck. Junpei collected the shards of her as gently and methodically as she had once picked up messes in the Avatar's mansion. First, a place to store the mess. He brought her to her room and sat her on her bed. Then he took it upon himself to find Zoryu and let him know the plan hadn't worked. The lack of an angry Fire Lord beating down her door to demand answers for her failure likely meant that Zoryu had decided to withdraw and collapse much like Kyoshi was doing now. There was a set length of wick left to burn before his country set ablaze. There was a set length of wick before. Yeah, there was. There was a set length of wick left to burn before his country set blade and fire against itself, and it was exactly however long it took for Huazo and Shaijin to walk back from the cliffside to the capital. A day, two. As soon as they met up with their clan, a new a new, bloody chapter of the Fire Nation history would begin. Kyoshi wasted a few precious hours of her remaining time before that moment sleeping. A sympathetic future scribe, slicing the records apart to truly understand why the Fire Nation broke out into civil war under Kyoshi's tenure, might declare the Avatar had blacked out from strain and exhaustion. In truth, it was the kind of sleep where she was afraid of tomorrow and what the morning would bring. Tears squeezed out of her shut eyes as she fell into the slumber of weakness. She simply couldn't handle being awake anymore. Dark grayness was her shroud until Jinpa roused her. Shaking her shoulders. Avatar, the Fire Lord is calling for an assembly. I'm barred from going, but you should be there. Huazo and Chajin must have arrived. At least Zoryu was using his final peacetime moments to speak to his people, rather than hide away. He'd done better than her in the end. Huazo and Chajin, oh no, I already read that. Kyoshi shambled down the halls of the palace. It felt like she was decaying with each step, flakes of her peeling away to reveal hollowness underneath. She was a layer of dried paint surrounding nothing. She heard an excited titter. A young noble couple rushed past them. Hold on, jeez. Okay. The fuck? Okay. Yeah, she heard an excited titter. A young noble couple rushed past them, paying no heed to the Avatar. The woman holding her skirt so it wouldn't drag. Her escort trying to plaster over his grin with solemnness. The briefest whisper passed between them. He's done for. They appear to be heading in the same direction as Kyoshi. As she rounded the corner, the hall filled with more members of the court, murmuring to each other. She followed in behind them, carried along by the tide, until she reached a large room they hadn't been to before. A theater with a stage running along a theater with a running stage along one wall. It must have been built so the royal family could take in plays without having to rub shoulders with the residents of Caldera City, or worse, Harbor City. It was standing room only. Kyoshi lingered near the back. Like any performance, there was an agonizing wait until the first actor emerged. The crowd hushed when Zoryu walked out on stage, looking haggard and resigned. A wispy mustache formed over his upper lip like mold on bread. "My friends," he said, "it has been a difficult time for our great nation. Instead of peace and abundance, this year's festival of Seto has brought a horrendous attack upon the sanctity of the palace, the bodies of our court, and the Fire Nation's history itself. The rumination of the Fire Avatar Gallery is a grievous wound to my heart. It will never heal. Zoryu was much better at speaking alone, from an elevated position, than he was at mingling in a crowd where he could be overshadowed by his political foes. The slouch in his shoulders was less pronounced, and there was a flinty look in his eye. I was told myself that I couldn't avenge this slight upon our honor. I had no right to call myself Fire Lord, he said. That much still holds true. His audience ruffled like stalks of wheat in the breeze. This was no mere update. About a quarter of the nobles packed into this room were Sawan. They smirked in delight at their victory. The men and women Kyoshi could identify as Kyoso numbered fewer than half the Sawan. Rage warped their faces to the point she thought their noses started bleeding. There was no need for flower symbols to tell who belonged to which clan. The nobles weren't part of any... The nobles weren't part of... Yeah, the nobles who... sorry. The nobles who weren't part of one faction or the other in this rivalry were already darting their eyes around, wondering if they'd sufficiently hedged their bets in favor of the Sawan. Little rings of space began forming in the furious Kyoso as people sought more distance from them. Zoryu held his hand up. Let it be known that the spirits of the islands have been watching my reign since its inception, judging my fitness to be Fire Lord. With the attack upon the palace, they put me to the final test. He swept his gaze over the room. And I have passed it. I have found the perpetrator. Bring him out, please. The declaration was so sudden that Kyoshi chuckled. The perpetrator was Yoon, which meant Zoryu found Yoon. Zoryu had found Yoon? Her laughter iced over in her throat, solidifying into barbs and cutting edges. Two palace guards brought out their blindfolded captive, hunched over from the weight of his iron shackles. Hold on. Hunched over from the weight of his iron shackles. Kyoshi could... Okay. Okay, there we go. Kyoshi could only see the top of his tousled brown hair as he was made to kneel next to Zoryu. I don't know why, but I always thought of Yoon as like bald. But I guess he's not bald. I always see him as more air nomad than anything. Or more of an airbender. With pointy brown hair. Damn. But yes, Kyoshi could only see the top of his tousled brown hair as she was made to kneel next to Zoryu. It was happening too fast. The stage felt just disjointed in time from the audience in Kyoshi, as if she were struck in the same trance as her session with Nahitha on the mountain. She raised her arm toward Yoon and opened her mouth to shout, but Zoryu, working on a faster rhythm, launched into the next stage of a speech. This man has confessed to crimes against the Fire Nation, for which he will be executed, he said. Kyoshi couldn't have been so shocked to hear him mention capital punishment, but in a prolonged fit of nativite, I don't really know how to pronounce that word. Naivete. I was close. Naivete. But in a prolonged fit of naivete, she hadn't considered at all that finding Yoon would mean delivering him to a death sentence. Zoryu grabbed Yoon by the head and tilted his face toward the light in the room. It was a meaningful gesture intended to give the audience a better look, both at the captive and Zoryu's dominance over him. Have you anything to say in your defense, you despicable beast? No. Yoon's features were smudged heavily in dirt. He wore the same robes he appeared in at the party. I infiltrated the palace. I assaulted the members of the court. I vandalized the royal gallery. I killed Chancellor Dairin. Yoon took a deep breath. And I did it all at the behest of the Salwon clan. Oh. It kind of does. Not gonna lie, it kind of does. It's probably not it, but I have a feeling well, it seems like Kyoshi knows that this is Yoon. And everyone can see his face, too. Slice. Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Like maybe he was, Lord Zoryu was in on it the whole time. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It seems a bit of a stretch, that one. That Zoryu would be part of this grand scheme with Yoon. But it's very, I wouldn't say it's very likely, but it's likely. You know? And that way he could make sure that the Salwon don't get their way. and they seem like the villains in this. So so he frames it on the Salwan. So that way yeah, that would be a good twist. Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking that. That's my first theory in this. All right. Okay. Um, Yoon took a deep breath, and I did it all at the behest of the Salwan clan. A rumble of shock passed through the crowd. He had to shout to be heard over the din. Oh, I guess his face isn't uncovered yet. I was paid by Huazo of the Salwan to humiliate Fire Lord Zoryu. I blasphemy. I blasphemed. Blasphemed? Blasphemed? I blast. Let me. Because it's blasphemy, but I've never heard it blasphemed before. Blasphemed. I'm pretty sure I'm saying it right, but. Blasphemy? I think it's blasphemed, yeah. Blasphemy? God, my fingers like so just. Ugh. Doesn't feel good, doesn't feel good at all. I blasphemed by faking signs from the spirits on the islands. I committed foul deeds here and in North Changling to instigate a war that might put the usurper Cheishin on the throne. It was a confession to everything Kyoshi thought the Saiwan had conspired to, the exact result she'd been hoping to achieve. The tromping of boots could be heard coming down the hall. Nobles began to shout and shove each other in the crowded room. Treason! Treason! Zoryu shouted, stoking the fires in confusion and panic, instead of calming his subjects. You have heard testimony of treason against the Fire Nation itself. All citizens who remain true to our country, regardless of your clan, seize the Salwon criminals here and now. The Kaoso were the first to act, barely needing a reason. They leaped upon their enemies and dragged them to the ground. A ridiculous-looking scuffle of polished men and silken ladies, flailing away like a drunken rage that suddenly possessed them. This was the brawl of North Changling, smaller and better dressed. The grudge of a lowly peasant town, continuing in the rarefied air of the royal palace. Human beings could drape themselves in titles and etiquette, but at their hearts they were all the same animal. The unaffiliated robes had a dilemma thrust upon them. Until now, the tides of power had clearly been flowing in one direction. The suddenness of Zoryu's declaration asked them to reverse course, to leap from their doomed boats and start swimming upstream. Kyoshi saw the flashes of calculation run through the rest of the clans, faster than lightning. It was gang math. The Saiwan really had overstepped their bounds recently, hadn't they? They were the largest family, but their numbers paled in comparison to the rest of the Fire Nation unified. Fire Nation folk were a decisive group, were a decisive people. The rest of the clans found no more upside. The rest of the clans found no more upside in to being allied with the Sawan. They turned on their neighbors with a greater violence than the Kyoso, pummeling anyone wearing stone camellias into submission with demonstrative zeal, needing to make up for lost ground. Palace guards, presumably loyal to Zoryu, were flooding into the room. No one wanted to be caught in sympathizing with the traitors. Zoryu and his prisoner were hustled out the back by guards. Oh, it might be a fake then if they didn't see Yoon's face. Though Kyoshi would have recognized Yoon's voice. Okay, I'm gonna keep reading to find out. Yeah, Zoryu and his prisoner were hustled out the back by guards as soon as the violence started. Kyoshi fought her way to the stage, slipping by men with bloody faces, nearly stepping on a woman crawling along the floor. She hoisted herself onto the empty platform and followed down the dark passage. I mean, I don't know. I feel like you could. Unless it's like really muffled. But yes, she hoisted herself onto the empty platform and rolled down the dark passage. Immediately, she crashed into a sharp turn. The stage exit was less a tunnel and more a catacomb, twisting left and right and forking into multiple paths. She lit her way through the maze of wooden walls with fire cradled in her hand, and chose her route by listening to the sound of chains rattling. Alone, she was faster than two men dragging a third. She entered a wide, straight corridor where an ambush waited. Half a dozen new guards barred her path, already in fighting stances. Yoon's captors made haste for another passage at the end. Yoon's captors made haste for another passage at the end of the hall. Kyoshi sent forth a snaking torrent of wind from one of her palms that blew past the squad of guardsmen and slammed the exit's heavy wooden door shut. Yoon was close to the floor and was weighed down by iron shackles, so he was saved from the brunt of it. But one of his captors was thrown into the black wall and knocked out. The other one tried to pull the door open. Hold on, I was not paying attention. Actually, let me put on some more of my plant medicine, my cream. Cause yeah, it is like, I don't know what is up with these fingers, man. Okay, there we go. I think I've done it. Okay. Kyoshi sent forth a snaking torrent of wind from one of her palms that blew past the squad of guardsmen and slammed the exit's heavy wooden door shut. Yoon was close to the floor and was weighed down by iron shackles, so he was saved from the brunt of it. but one of his captors was thrown into the back wall and knocked out. The other one tried to pull the door open by the bronze ring handle, but she kept up the gale force pressure and it refused to budge. The rest of the soldiers attacked. They were the royal elite, undoubtedly selected from the best of the best to serve in the palace. But Kyoshi was the Avatar, and she still had a free hand. She advanced down the hall through the storm of fireballs, deflecting them at first to the right and left, and then simply catching them once she gauged how far her raw bending strength surpassed her opponent's. She didn't have to outthink here in this confined space, or possess better technique. She could overwhelm. "Call reinforcements!" one of the guards screamed as his mistimed fire jab dissipated ineffectually against Kyoshi's chest. There were only two ways out of the corridor, and she controlled them both. She flicked a single wrist to counterattack. The dirty secret of airbending Kyoshi had learned through experience was that it was absolutely devastating in close quarters. Surrounded by hard objects, the gentle art of monks and nuns turned utterly brutal. She sent wind back and forth through rapid changes in direction. The guards were taken by their mindset. The guards were taken by their midsections, flung into spine-rattling collisions with the walls and ceilings. They collapsed into the armored heaps. Kyoshi walked up to the shackled and blindfolded man, who had managed to inch himself into a sitting position. "Who are you?" she asked. "Oh, okay, she doesn't know who he is then." "Who are you really? Because I know you're not Yoon." He cringed. "What do you mean? I'm Yoon, the man who attacked the palace, the false Avatar." She snatched away the cloth tied over his eyes to reveal golden irises. He was Fire Nation, though he looked very much like the man he was impersonating. He had the same handsome planes to his face as Yoon, the same hair, the same build. The similarity I called it a good fake. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, he had the same handsome planes to his face as Yoon, the same hair, the same build. The similarity was amazing, as brotherly as Zoryu and Cheijin. But Kyoshi knew he was a fake from the first word he'd said out loud. He had been coached to sound like Yoon and was good enough to fool the nobles who'd been at the party. But he wasn't good enough to trick someone who'd lived with Yoon and heard every emotion his voice could produce. Laughter and despair and maybe even love somewhere in between. Nor was he wounded in the shoulder. Kyoshi hadn't shared that detail with Zoryu. If she had, the Fire Lord would have undoubtedly burned the man to keep up the ruse. Kyoshi knelt down and gripped the bindings between his ankles, heating them in her hands. She pulled off this metal snapping trick once before, back in Governor Ted's mansion, but Kyoshi wasn't fooled, but she didn't tell us readers she wasn't fooled. Yeah, she didn't tell us until then. Yeah. She pulled off his metal snapping. She'd pulled off this metal snapping trick once before, but back at Governor Ted's mansion, she didn't have to worry about scorching someone else. "What are you doing?" the man yelled. He tried to worm free of her grasp. Stop moving. I'm getting you out of here. I won't let you die for crimes you didn't commit. You can't. Leave me alone. I need this. It took a great deal to distract her so badly that she could feel the pain of burning herself through the numbness of her lightning scars. She hissed and dropped the red hot iron. You need to die? Yes! My family in Hanawu, we have nothing. Less than nothing. My debts. The Fire Lord promised me they'd be paid off upon my death. This is the last thing I could do for my wife and children. Shouts echoed and bounced off the walls. Please, the man begged. I was promised a quick and merciful execution. My family will starve if I don't do this. Save me, and you'll be killing them. In a scramble for more arguments to hurl at Kyoshi, the man who was probably a farmer or fisherman down on his luck resorted to the highest level of politics. The court needs its scapegoat, doesn't it? The court needs its scapegoat, doesn't it? I understand the situation. I'm not stupid. Letting me die is necessary for the country. He spoke in the Fire Lord's argument on Zoryu's behalf. Yeah, this is a fucked up thing. Jesus. Yeah, he spoke in the Fire Lord's argument on Zoryu's behalf. It was necessary. Everything was necessary. An innocent man was going to die, and the whole world, down to the victim himself, was whispering in his ear to stand back and let it happen. Kyoshi's shriek started low in her stomach and filled her body. It was a sound of pure and total despair. The country would be saved. Her side had won. The guards rounding the corner were thrown back by her cries of anguish, the ghost tearing itself free from her lungs. Yoon's imposter, so ready to die, shuddered away from her howls like they were curses. Kyoshi screamed in the darkness, over and over again, her hatred for the world and herself spiraling into oblivion. And that is the end of that chapter. Man, I know. I can't imagine that. That's really rough. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know. I know, that is so you. We need a Kyoshi series. An animated series. A comic book would also be nice, but I think an animated series would go a long way. Okay. The next chapter is called House Cleaning. House Cleaning. She found Zoryu in the war room. A large table had been set amid the dragons. On top were two maps, one of the Fire Islands, and another of a single... Yeah! No! Yep, that's her. That's her right now. Yep. Totally agree with you. Alright. She found Zoryu in the war room. A large table had been set amid the dragons. On top were two maps, one of the Fire Islands and another of a single landmass resembling a fish's head. Mainka. The island looked like the main dish, of a banquet, ready to be carved up and served. The Fire Lord himself was alone in the empty hall, no advisors to give him counsel, leaning over the strategy table with outspread hands as the heavy burden of rulership weighed on his shoulders. Kyoshi wondered why he stayed there, not reacting to her entrance, until she realized there was one other person in the corner of the room, an artist making a sketch, scribbling diligently on a small canvas. Zoryu wanted to capture the most pivotal moment of his reign for prosperity. The pose was too informal for his entry into the royal gallery, but this was meant to be a more intimate masterpiece, something to show his grandchildren and their grandchildren. No glory in victory. No glory in victory, for one as wise as Zoryu, only the pain and burden of leadership. Leave, Kyoshi said to the artist. The young woman tucked her sketch under her arm and started for the door before remembering to wait for her Fire Lord's permission. Zoryu waved her away. Before today, she would have walked straight out of this room without a second glance at me. He said to Kyoshi once they were alone. I'm making progress. So he was. Where did you find the double? Trade secrets of the royalty, he said. Master Jianzu and Yoon themselves advised me on how to restart the program, back before I knew you existed. They advocated the usefulness of having a decoy for Yoon. Apparently, the practice is good for making speeches and foiling assassins. Zoryu chuckled to himself at the irony. People aren't as unique as they believe themselves to be, and the Fire Nation is a populous country. You should check with the Earth King. You'd be surprised who he has copies of lying around. He eyed her up and down. I don't think anyone could find your like, so worry not. There will only ever be one Avatar Kyoshi. It might have been one too many. What will happen to the Sawon? I will round up and arrest the ones here in the capital. The other clans will do the same across their home islands on behalf of the Fire Lord. And then I'll have them killed. Oh my god! But most of those people are innocent. You can't just kill off an entire clan. Yeah, of course they're gonna be petty, but that's just evil. That is just evil. Like, erasing a part of a clan, that is just evil. Just so nothing will get in your way and everything will be fine for you. That is plain evil. Yeah. Oh yeah. You're half joking. Yeah, I know you're only always half joking. But dude, this guy is serious. Without pausing to consider the weight of what he said, he gestured at the map on the table. As for Mainka itself, I believe the Sawon will retreat to their mountain forts. At which point there will be a lengthy siege. Sieges are always unpleasant affairs, but they don't have to be bloody. With the rest of the country's noble houses united behind me, I'll be able to starve the Sawon out, or to death. I know, right? Jesus Christ. Anything for honor. Anything for honor. I mean, I guess. Okay. Yeah, sieges are always unpleasant affairs, but they don't have to be bloody. With the rest of this country's noble houses united behind me, I'll be able to starve the Sawan out, or to death. An entire clan of the Fire Nation wiped off the face of the earth. As simple as that. He walked out from around the table and rapped it once between his knuckles. It's better than what would have happened otherwise. Being my best guess, 3/5 of the clan would have joined the Sawan and turned on me. Had things continued the way they were headed, it would have been open war across the entire Fire Nation. Instead of resigning to a grinding conflict of attrition, Zoryu had isolated his enemies, branded them as criminals, and trapped them on a single island. He played his tiles masterfully, but there was still a critical flaw in his operation. If the real Yoon shows up again, your ruse will be exposed, she said. Everything would fall apart. Oh, I know. The Fire Nation would tear itself apart in the chaos and confusion. All I have really done is buy you more time to find him. The first time Zoryu had explained to her the precipice the Fire Nation bounced on, it had been a cry for help. Now repeated here, it had been an ultimatum. You're not done assisting me, Kyoshi, he said softly. You don't want my nation to suffer any more than I do. You and I are still in this together. A ruler holding his own country hostage. She had been so worried about turning into Jiansu, as if the Earth Sage had been a special breed of a monster, threatening to be reborn through her and only her. How laughable a notion. The fact of the matter was, the world grew Jiansus by the bushel. They sprouted from the soil and multiplied from the seas. People sought to emulate Jiansu with every fiber of their being. Kyoshi had forgotten her Daofei oaths. Becoming the lackey of a crown was a violation punishable by knives. For bending to Zoryu's will, she would be ripped apart by thunderbolts. The best she could do in her defeat was to save as many lives as possible. I want clemency for the Sawan, if I'm to help you. Why should I give it? Even if they weren't collaborating with Yoon, they were undermining my authority. Do you think if they succeeded in taking the throne, Sheijin would have sent me gently into exile? Kyoshi thought of a phrase her friend Wang had told her back in her flying opera company days. A fight is over only when the winner says it's over. She had to make sure Zoryu didn't commit an atrocity in celebration of his victory. Punish them in accordance for their tricks, but not for an act of treason they didn't commit. There will be no wholesome massacre. I'll look weak. Good thing you're a savvy politician capable of crafting his image into whatever suits his needs. He narrowed his eyes at her. As long as you're asking for the impossible, do you have any more demands? I do. Yoon Sequoia. I want him sent home alive and rewarded for his troubles. Zoryu swelled with resistance. This was a bigger issue for him than the fate of his rivals. No, I have to hold an execution. I need a body, or else the honor of the entire Fire Nation goes unsatisfied. I've heard stories about you, Kyoshi, and I know the things you've seen. What do you care if a single peasant lives or dies? She crossed the distance between them and thrust a cold fan under his chin, stopping short of his throat. I care more for his life than I do for yours right now, she said, examining the growing whites of Zoryu's eyes. Let me make myself perfectly clear. You live on top of what I control. Your islands are surrounded by my waves. You fill your very lungs with my you fill your very lungs at my discretion. So if I hear any news about Yoon being executed, you will truly learn what it's like when the spirits forsake you and the face of the elements. Zoryu cowered before her sudden onslaught. They always did. For a brief moment, the Fire Lord knew what it was like to be truly helpless. But unlike so many Dao Fei and triads before him, he found the strength of his title at his back. He was the ruler of this Fire Nation, and Kyoshi was the Avatar. She had her own image, as poor as it was, to think about. Slowly but surely, Zoryu grinned at her bluff. He did her the favor of not saying out loud how badly she'd overplayed her situation. Instead, he took on a pity of air. An air of pity. Let me give you a bit of advice when you next. Let me give you a bit of advice for when you next see Yoon, he said. I've thought a great deal about this ever since he first showed up, and I think I know why you've been having so much trouble against him. You don't understand his feelings. She pressed the fan deeper into the underside of Zoryu's jaw, but he didn't flinch. Yoon hates us, Zoryu said. Everything he's done so far is because he hates us. You, me, the lieutenant. That's not true, Kyoshi snarled. We were his friends. He's been acting out of vengeance. He said so. Zoryu shook his head. I don't think he realizes it. It's himself. Consider his deeds, Kyoshi, not his words. Who has he been causing the most pain? For starters, me. By my reckoning, he's angry with me for daring to rule my country without his help. He's also furious with the lieutenant for having her mother's unconditional love. What Jianzu gave him wasn't anything of the sort. And then there's you, Kyoshi. And then there was her. Yoon has never been able to let go of the fact that he's not the Avatar. Yes, correct, that is true. He is very mad about that still, Zoryu said. He's pissed. Yeah, man. Yoon has never been able to let go of the fact he's not the Avatar, Zoryu said. To this day, he agonizes over what should have been. He grieves for his lost destiny, and that grief has turned into blame. He nudged the fan aside, expecting her to lose control of her emotions any second. Jianzu and the others might have lied about his avatarhood, Kyoshi, but only one person truly stole it from him. You. Seeing he'd rendered her incapable of response, he sidestepped out of her grasp and went back to his map table. He's punishing us, Kyoshi, for for moving on from him and having the things he doesn't. And unless you accept the truth, sooner or later he is going to punish you in a way I can't even imagine. Kyoshi swallowed the buildup in her throat. She had no way of disproving any of Zoryu's insights other than her own stubborn faith that she knew Yoon better. I suppose you can tell all this because you played him in Paisho, she said hoarsely. No, I can tell because I'm not blinded by the past like the two of you are. Maybe he is truly possessed by a spirit. It doesn't change what needs to be done. He waved at the door. Now, please leave me. You have work to do, and I have the future of my country to plan. And that is the end of that chapter. I will go on to the next chapter, which is called Second Chances. Second Chances. Kyoshi needed to arrange some travel for herself. She couldn't bear having to explain another half-baked plan to Jinpa, she couldn't bear having to explain another half-baked plan to Jinpa. Nor did she want him to nor did she want him present when she carried it out. So she went to a palace minister with her request for a ship, and kept the whole arrangement from her secretary. Hold on, just 1 second. I'm putting more lotion on my finger. It's helping a lot, but still, it's very, very uncomfortable. Okay. So she went to a place. So she went to a palace minister with her request for a ship, and kept the whole arrangement from her secretary. The next morning, upon learning a vessel waited for her at the harbor, she left the palace for herself. The guards opened many doors and gates without her needing to ask or even break stride. It made her feel like a farm animal being guided out of its pen. She got into a carriage which took her through Caldera City, down the volcano slope, and through Harbor City. News of the Sawan's heinous acts had spread overnight through the capital, and the streets were mostly empty. The festival was at Seto abandoned mid-swing in the face of such treachery. Parade boats remained inside alleys, covered in tarps. Lanterns bobbed in the breeze, unlit. Kyoshi nearly marveled at the speed of court rumors before realizing Zoryu had probably spread the information throughout the island himself. Hold on just a second. Then I need to put my chopstick on. Yeah. Like most of the major clans, the Sawan would have had a normal, everyday presence in the capital. Businesses and family homes. That was no longer the case. Primed to look for them, Kyoshi saw signs everywhere of a swift, efficient purge. A lone shop in a commerce street might have closed, and a lone shop in a commerce street might be closed and dark, while its neighbors are still open. A luxurious apartment, most certainly belonging to a noble, had no clan banner on its flagpole. Wisps of black smoke rose from the distance, clustered too near each other to be a coincidence. She had to fight to keep the sourness in her stomach down. Better than open war was not a standard to live by, and yet people seemed content with it. She reached the docks and found her ship. It was a well-made sloop with a deep keel. A speedy ocean traveler with no need to hug coasts and rivers like squat Earth Kingdom transports. But she winced when she saw the name on the side. Sulon smiled. The late Lord Shiryu might have commissioned it for his wife's personal use before the two of them passed. It barely looked used. Kyoshi decided who also had the right measure of it. Zoryu's mother had no blame in recent events, or at least the same amount of blame as everyone else in this whole affair. Kyoshi boarded the boat. Kyoshi boarded the boat and did her best to ignore the neighboring cargo hauler, having its stone camellia decorations scraped off by a team of Fire Nation sailors. Red paint falling in flakes to the water surface like clotted blood. The crew of Sulon Smile left her alone as they sailed in the direction she'd ordered. As she stood on the deck, she could feel the water dragging on the hull like fingers, gripping the vessel. As she stood on the deck, she could feel the water dragging on the hull like fingers, gripping the vessel, slowing it down more than the thin air ever did to yin yang or peng peng. Compared to flying, every method of travel was a slog. She supposed she could have tried to speed them along with water bending, but she had heard it was possible to damage and capsize a vessel that way if the waterbender didn't know what they were doing. They came to the dark patch below the waves she was looking for. Kyoshi ordered the ship to drop anchor. Captain Junho, a man with whiskers like spruce needles, stood at the head of his crew of hardy, weather-beaten sailors, waiting for her next command. Wait here until I return, Kyoshi told him. Do not try to come after me, no matter what happens. I don't understand, Avatar. Junhu said. Return from where? There's nothing here. I wonder if she's going to the place where Karuk kind of fucked up the island. Or was that farther away? I don't remember. We will see. You returned from where? There's nothing here. Kyoshi hoisted herself onto the railing of the ship. There used to be. She plunged into the water. Ah, so she is going to that place. She could hear shouting from above the surface. Some of the men might have been inclined to dive in and rescue her, but her orders had been clear. They would have had difficulty catching her anyway. Kyoshi had worn her full complement of armor so she could sink faster. She kicked downward, swimming for the ruins of Yangchen's island. As before, it took her an embarrassingly long time for her to remember she was a waterbender. With a flap of her arms, she surged faster than an elephant koi. Her sight became blackness. The only reminder she was swimming through water was the burning in her lungs as she ran out of air. She fought through the knives in her chest to keep going, but her bravery brought her only a few more kicks. Her mouth opened and she swallowed into fullness. A cloud of bubbles escaped her throat before the seawater rushed into her body, violating every space she had left. She was drowning. She'd come here with a crew of strangers because none of her companions could have let her take the risk. Kyoshi fought for as long as she could, wanting to bring her consciousness to the very edge. So that way she could go into the Avatar state, I think. Yeah. Wanting to bring her consciousness to the very edge. With her last reserves of thought, she sent out her message. Karuk, get out here before I die, or I will cross over to the other side and come after you there. Kid, you can open your eyes. Kyoshi blinked awake. It was warm and bright. The scent of grass tickled her nose. She was sitting in a green field that rolled gently into the distance. On one side of the horizon was a row of streets that looked. On one side of the horizon was a row of trees that looked placed by hand, applied to the top of the hills like Kyoshi's eyebrow liner when she wore makeup. Opposite the forest was a tall peak jutting high into the air after a few false starts. The lines of clouds converged to a point behind it, as if the mountains were a sun emitting beams of light. Her predecessor in the Avatar cycle was dressed more casually than the one time he'd fully appeared before her. Karuk was without his furs and only wore a light blue water-tribe summer tunic. His arms and neck were still adorned with the sharp teeth and claws of beasts, strung through by leather thongs. He made a crooked half-smile that tugged one side of his face higher. I've been trying to get a hold of you for the longest time, but I needed your help to do it. An avatar taking to their past lives requires true willingness from both ends. His message to her in the Southern Air Temple: need your help. He hadn't been asking for a favor from beyond the grave. He needed her help. He needed her help in order to communicate properly. Of all the stupid, unclear ways for him to put it. What did you want to talk about? The same thing as you. Your boy, him, and Father Glowworm. I can guide you to what you seek. It's why you're here now, isn't it? So she hadn't been wrong in going to North Chungling to get Karuk's help. Congratulations to her. Vindication felt about as good as drowning. She should have just kept her mouth shut and take whatever assistance Karuk was offering. But there was an unsettling calmness to their conversation. It was happening in complete silence. Something was cut off. This is the spirit world, isn't it? She asked. Where are the spirits? The two of them were the only beings sitting in the vast field. Kyoshi had little to base her expectations on, but unless the plants and rocks themselves were alive, this place was as devoid of life as the dried patches of the Siwang Desert. Karuk winced. Most spirits tend to give me a wide berth. Why? He didn't want to say, but he was talking to himself. Lying was pointless. Because I used to hunt them. Fuck. Damn. Kyoshi rubbed her face, feeling the cracks and lines of her fingers. Lao Gu had mentioned it before. You're a fucking ass, Karuk. That's why. Yep. Damn. Lao Gu had mentioned it. Yeah. Kyoshi rubbed her face, feeling the cracks and lines with her fingers. Lao Gu had mentioned it once. Karuk, the greatest hunter that ever walked the Four Nations. The trophies that had decorated his body the first time he manifested before her in his full regalia. If slaying beasts in the physical world no longer posed a challenge, then it wasn't so far-fetched that a reckless, thrill-seeking adventurer like Karuk would turn his eye toward spirits. Being the Avatar would give him Being the Avatar would have given him the means. You, she said. It was hard to speak through the grin ripping her mouth apart and difficult to see through the tears streaming down her face. You are something else. Letting her feelings run loose was like putting boiled herbs to a burn. It was necessary and painful, and it had been postponed long enough. Karuk swallowed, unable to meet her gaze. It's not what you think. Yang Chen, don't you dare! Don't you dare! Kyoshi giggled. Kyoshi giggled. Her tears flew down her own throat. Yeah, her tears flew down her own throat as she gasped. Don't you dare bring her into this. You're not worthy of her legacy. Your name belongs in the gutter with mine. Here she was, in the middle of the most sacred act an Avatar could perform. Except she was Kyoshi, and Karuk was Karuk. Had there ever been a worse duo in history? Disaster followed by a catastrophe? The hilarity of her situation snuffed itself out like a candle with a glass placed over it. A dead, airless feeling followed. This isn't fair, she said. None of this is fair. The ground around her began to ripple. She heard a flitting, flapping sound like the pages of a thick book being swiped. Hold on just 1 second. Okay. The earth around her began to ripple. She heard a flipping sound like the pages of a thick book being swiped. Starting from the horizon, a crack in the grass began to zigzag and spiderweb toward them. Pieces of the terrain itself started falling into the rift, making it clear that she and Karuk stood not on solid ground, but a fragile, thin surface. Hold on just a second. Yeah, sorry, I just got lost in thought. Yeah, what was this? Where was I? Yeah, pieces of the train itself started falling into the rift, making it clear that she and Karuk stood not on solid ground, but a fragile, thin surface. But this wasn't bending. It was a reflection of the wounds she'd suffered. Here in the spirit world, her pain had substance. I hate you, she screamed at Karuk. The tear in the ground revealed a shade of color underneath that Kyoshi could not explain in the language of the Four Nations. It was the tint of the abyss, the background swirl of chaos. If she fell into it, there would be no coming back. You had everything handed to you. Yang Chen gave her legacy to you, and you squandered it. You left me a world full of nothing and suffering and misery. The collapse picked up speed, racing toward her and her past life, threatening to drop them both in a twisted new existence. The landslide consumed the trees, the grass, the sky, abrading reality, shrinking her mind. Nothing in an nothingness in an onrushing wave. Karuk gazed at the annihilation coming for both of them, and in response, he gave her a look of complete surrender. You have every right, he said gently. At the very last second, the crumbling halted at the edge of their feet. Did she? No, she thought. She didn't. She didn't have the right to lose herself in her rage and let it take her to oblivion. No matter what she'd been through, she wouldn't allow herself to become a human scar, a compendium of personal loss. She had the obligation to be more than some of her grievances with the world. Gradually, shard by shard, the surfaces and planes of the spirit world floated back into place, raised from the chasm they had fallen into, affixing themselves to each other, raising from the chasm they had fallen into, affixing themselves to each other like a plate mended with gilded lacquer. Whether it was her doing or the sorry, I need to adjust myself again. Yeah, whether it was her doing or the work of forces beyond her control. She wasn't sure. Either way, it was slow going. rebuilding always took longer than destruction. Cleaning a mess more time than making it. Karuk watched the landscape prepare itself, neutrality still lingering in his expression despite the fact he'd nearly taken a plunge into the terrifying beyond with Kyoshi. You came here for answers, he said to her, holding out his hand. I have something to show you. I have to show you something. Don't touch me. She smacked his hand away. And the moment they made contact, it occurred to Kyoshi she wasn't wearing her gauntlets in the spirit world. Her hands were bare, and the red scars of lightning were nowhere to be seen, as if her memories of herself hadn't incorporated the damage to her skin. No one had explained to her what would happen if her form touched Karuk's in the spirit world. There was a flash of light in her head, and when it subsided, Kyoshi found herself imprisoned once again in the unbreakable cage of memory. And that is the end of that chapter. And now we go on to the next chapter. And the next chapter, which is probably going to be the last chapter, I think. Flying, damn. We are I'm at 275 right now. The book ends at 340. So we are very close to the end. Like, extremely close to the end. Well, I wouldn't say extremely, but next session, I'm probably going to finish the book. Yeah, it's a lot of, like, short chapters. Not a lot of big chapters. Not a lot of long chapters. Okay, so the next chapter is called Lost Friends. Lost Friends. Karuk opened his eyes. He was no longer in Yangchen's meadow near Yaoping, facing Kaosang under the starry sky. He realized the source of his air nomad friend's conflict with his elders. Hold on. Yeah, Karuk opened his eyes. He was no longer in Yangchen's meadow near Yaoping, facing Kaosang under the starry sky. He realized the source of his air nomad friend's conflict with his elders when it came to what the spirit world looked like. The realm beyond the physical was different. Yeah, the realm beyond the physical was different. It was different things to different people at different times. The Avatar was alone. His friend nowhere to be found in the hissing gray swampland. They'd lost each other somewhere in the journey. The water around Karuk slathered with not life, but something akin to it, and all the more unsettling for the closeness. A scream and a beating of a drum were all he could hear, incessant, hysterical, and only when he braved the foul water and flayed his way to a solid shore did he find the source. A spirit. Not one of Kaosang's playful creatures, but a monstrosity the size of a house, gripping the ground with arms like spider limbs and bashing its featureless head against the earth over and over again, causing itself horrible pain, but never ceasing its assault, nor its shriek that came from no discernible mouth. Before he could swallow Before he could swallow her horror and try to speak, before he could swallow, before he could swallow her horror and try to speak to it, a long tail wrapped around his neck and hoisted him into the air. Their forms were crushed together. Revulsion reaped. Hold on, let me just. Yeah, their forms were crushed together. Revulsion seeped through his skin, a feeling of being tied to a corpse. The creature hurled himself to the ground, and he bounced like stuffed rags, blacking out from a pain to his. Yeah, the creature hurled himself to the ground, and he bounced like stuffed rags, blacking out from a pain to his ethereal. I think it's ethereal, right? Or is it ethereal? I'm gonna look it up. Ethereal. 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 Okay. Yeah, blacking out from a pain to his ethereal form that did its best to mimic the physical. Before he lost consciousness, he caught a glimpse of what the spirit was attacking so ferociously with its skull. It was a pond of ice. The reflection on the silvery sheen was a hillside view of Yaoping town. Karuk woke up with a gasp. Kelsang was still sitting across from him, his eyes closed, murmuring pleasantries like he was attending a tea ceremony. Karuk got up, ignored the looks of surprise on Heiran's and Jianzu's faces, and stole his friend's glider. He rode his own ferocious squall of airbending to Yaoping. There was no time to explain to the others what he knew in his heart. That monstrous spirit had found a crack between the spirit world and the world of humans. If it broke through, it was going to slaughter everyone it came across. There was only one place where someone could see the town from above like Karuk had, and that was the entrance to the salt mines in the neighboring town. He landed the glider and stood before the hole in the world, the gaping maw of darkness. I mean, I feel like he might have hunted for sport too. Because why else would he say, I used to hunt them? If not for sport too. At least that's how I read it as. Yeah. Let me put more. I'm putting more lotion on. Okay. Sorry about that. Alrighty. That monstrous spirit had found a crack between the spirit world and the world of humans. If it broke through, it was going to slaughter everyone it came across. There was only one place where someone could see the town from above like Karuk had, and that was the entrance to the salt mines and the neighboring mountain. He landed the glider and stood before the hole in the world, a gaping maw of darkness. He summoned its courage and ran inside. Better to cross through the rift and go on the attack in the spirit world. He would have his bending that way. Kelsang had said so. He found the enraged spirit and began to fight it. He didn't know how long the battle raged. He didn't know how long the battle raged. He only knew with grim certainty that the right avatar had been chosen for this task. This foe was a beast, and he was a hunter. A hunter struck fast and true, and was merciful to their prey. A hunter approached their duty with solemn respect. It took bringing all four elements to bear against a maddening spirit. It took bringing all four elements to bear against the maddened spirit to bring it down. But bring it down he did. He was victorious. The town was saved, and all would be well. The next morning, his friends found the avatar crawling blindly through the streets of Yaoping, foaming at the mouth. It was days before he could speak. Destroying the spirit had cost him a piece of his own, somehow. He was bleeding inside, losing something more vital than blood. Vitality leaching away in a manner no healer could fix. He was cold. Him, a child of the north who laughed at Blizzard. Is this how he dies? Oh, I wonder if this is how he dies. He was cold. Him, a child of the north who laughed at blizzards and swam laps around icebergs, was cold. Nothing pumped through his veins. He tried to oh shit, man. He tried to oh my god. He tried to tell Kelsang, Jianzu, and Heiran what happened and could not. The words stuck on his throat. He made up a story about a mischievous spirit tricking him into losing his faculties for a moment, like what happened to wandering children in ominous folk tales. His friends left him to rest in the bed of an inn. They looked for a doctor. The doctor came by and said there was nothing wrong with his body and told him to rest. He wanted to die. One day, when everyone else was out, a friendly maid came by and gave him some distilled wine in defiance of the doctor's orders. It burned his throat going down, the first sensation in days that cut through the hill. He drank more and more, feeling the liquid pressing against the wound inside him, like a red-hot iron to a severed limb. When the maid smiled and gently laid a hand upon his chest, the avatar clasped it like he was drowning. Oh shit, was he murdered? He couldn't remember the woman's face, but he remembered those of his friends when they happened upon the tangle of limbs poking out from under the covers, and the broken bottles littered the floor. Kelsang didn't judge. Wait, what? Oh, let me read that again. He couldn't remember the woman's face, but he remembered those of his friends when they happened upon the tangle of limbs poking out from under the covers, and the broken bottles littering the floor. Kelsing didn't judge. Jianzu didn't care, being of the opinion that if the Avatar had a certain desire, the Avatar should slake it. Karuk would only understand the difference in their reactions later in life. And Heiran, though she would never admit it, lost a great deal of respect for him in that moment. The door to the firebender's heart, while not locked forever, had been firmly shut. There was always going to be a position of her closed off to those who couldn't master themselves. Damn. But they bounced back. Their adventures went on. The Avatar's friends were remarkable. He loved them so much. He loved their intelligence, their aspirations, their sheer nobility. They were simply good people. There was so much good in this group that could do. There was so much good this group could do for the world. That was why, when the second spirit attack came, he came to face it alone again. His friends would insist on helping if they knew, but he would never, ever make them suffer what he had, not in 1,000 lifetimes. They would be tainted by association with a deed he had to do. A bad dream during a visit to the Fire Nation showed him a rift in a cenote, supplying sacred water to a corner of Mainka Island. He ran to the cavern in the middle of the night and dove into the water, defiling it. Instead of dashing his head against the stone bottom, he swam and swam straight down until he found the pass of writhing beaks, snapping and licking their way to the surface. He snapped the ice and he stabbed. Yeah, snapping and licking their way to the surface. He stabbed with ice and he stabbed with stone. His eyes closed. The screams of terror of his own. The screams of terror his own. His former hunting partners of his youth would have scorned him for not performing a clean kill. He could not look upon the dying thing. Once the deed was done, Karuk dragged himself over the lip of the cenote, weeping water onto the ledge. The cold emptiness inside him had returned in force. He crawled like a baby until he reached the feet of a man who stared down at him in puzzlement and distaste. The man was a fire national from a clan or tribe he didn't recognize. His name was Nahitha, he said, after receiving a premonition. The elders of the bounty sent him here to give aid to the Avatar. It was clear he had trouble believing this bed-raggled mess was great Yin Chen's successor. Nahitha hauled Karuk to a campsite in the jungle and performed some kind of diagnostic ritual, guiding heat along his energy pathways, similar to the way a northern healer would use water within a patient's body. Oh, okay. Okay, but you can hear me now? Oh, I guess not. You're not connected. Are you good? Okay. Yeah, I'll just read a little before that. What was the last thing you heard before it cut out? Oh shit, that's a long one. But I guess I could read pretty fast. Yeah, I could read to there again. Alright. But yeah. And Heiran, though she would never admit it, lost a great deal of respect for him in that moment. The door to the firebender's heart, while not locked forever, had been firmly shut. There was always going to be a portion of her closed off to people who couldn't master themselves. But they bounced back. Their adventures went on. The Avatar's friends were remarkable. He loved them so much. He loved their intelligence, their aspirations, their sheer nobility. They were simply good people. There was so much good this group could do for the world. That was why, when the Sanket spirit attack came, he went to face it alone again. His friends would insist on helping if they knew, but he would never, ever make them suffer what he had, not in 1,000 lifetimes. They would be tainted by association with the deed he had to do. A bad dream during a visit to the Fire Nation showed him a rift in a cenote supplying sacred water to a corner of Mainka Island. He ran to the cavern in the middle of the night and dove into the water, defiling it. Instead of dashing his head against the stone bottom, he swam and swam straight down until he found a mass of writhing beaks, snapping and licking their way to the surface. He stabbed with ice and he stabbed with stone, his eyes closed, the screams of terror his own. His former hunting partners of his youth would have scorned him for not performing a clean kill. He could not look upon the dying thing. Once the deed was done, Karuk dragged himself over the lip of the cenote, weeping water onto the ledge. The cold emptiness inside him had returned in force. He crawled like a baby until he reached the feet of a man who stared down at him in puzzlement and distaste. The man was a fire national from a clan or tribe he didn't recognize. His name was Nahitha, he said, and after receiving a premonition, the elders of the bounty had sent him here to give aid to the Avatar. It was clear he had trouble believing this bedraggled mess was great Yang Chen's successor. Nahitha hauled Karuk to a campsite in the jungle and performed some kind of diagnostic ritual, guiding heat along his energy pathways, similar to the way a northern healer would use the water within a patient's body. He confirmed what Karuk had already guessed, that coming into contact with these dark creatures and destroying them was causing damage to his own spirit. Nahitha prepared what he could, but admitted a permanent toll would be taken each time another of his battles was fought. Already, Karuk was going to be out Karuk was going to be out of the running for longest era in the Avatar books, in the Avatar history books. Such terrible bedside manner for a doctor. Karuk joked. Yeah, such terrible bedside manner for a doctor, Karuk joked. Couldn't he have broken the news a little more gently? Then he threw up blood all over the fire sage's robes. Yahitha's dire warnings cemented Karuk's decision not to tell his companions about the spirit incursions. They would follow him into any danger and give their lives to protect his. Staining the vibrant spirits of Heiran and Kelsang and Jianzu with the sickness would be a tragedy too horrible to consider. He was not going to see it happen, not even if it meant his own oblivion. He began to take breaks from his missions with them to do research with Yahitha. They visited the hidden library of the Banti, a contender for the greatest repository of spiritual knowledge in the physical realm. Together, under the peaked roofs of the stone pagodas, they pored over scrolls and tomes older than the four nations themselves. They deduced that the spirits were trying to force their way through newly created cracks in the boundary between the spirit world and the land of humans. They did not know why or how these cracks were forming all of a sudden. Normally, places where spirits could cross over were ancient and sacred and rare. Special circumstances like the twilights of hallowed dates were required. That didn't seem to be the case anymore. They also searched for a better technique to subdue their foes, but found none. Perhaps it had yet to be invented. Karuk shuddered as he closed the last promising book in the Bounty Library without finding salvation. As more attacks came, he realized he could stop the dark creatures across the spirit world itself, sometimes following the wake of great disturbances and storms across the ever-changing landscape, and sometimes relying on his own I've never heard that word before. Never seen that word before. Preternatural. Okay. Sometimes following the wake of the great disturbances and storms across the ever-changing landscape, and sometimes relying on his own preternatural tracking skills, his ability to cut sign from sheer ice and bare rock, and the smallest out-of-place blade of grass. On such excursions, he always had to pass through a rift from the physical world to the spiritual, taking on his quarry with his physical body. Without his bending, he stood no chance, and it made more sense to fight in the spirit world side of the other border. And it made more sense to fight on the spirit world side of the border to minimize collateral damage to humans. And so he hunted. He walked the realm beyond the physical. Ah, okay, so he was just murdering bad spirits. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I think that's the case. So he hunted. He walked the realm beyond the physical, searching for spirits with murderous intent, trying to force their way into a human population. Each time he found one, Karuk tried his best to placate the being's anger, at the cost of his blood and sweat and bones. Nothing worked. To save lives, he had to fight. He had to kill. He and Nahitha told no one what they did. They were like people graduating from petty theft to organized crime, and in too deep to ever extricate themselves. By the time they reached a certain number of hunts, lay folk would have shunned them for the spirits they destroyed, let alone the Bantu or the air nomads. The world went on. It had it had competent it had competent people looking after it. Karuk never never won never won for meetings, where the quickest minds were forced to adopt the pace of the slowest, began to sleep through them, exhausted by the lingering pain and the wine he drank to dull it. Jianzu would inevitably work things out with the diplomats and ministers and ambassadors by the time he woke up. His nights were spent carousing at parties and taverns, at contests of banding prowess, trying to feel as human as possible with as many different humans as possible. He secretly hoped that he secretly hoped Nishitha would find a secret text declaring the official treatment for his symptoms was to be close to life, joy, and the touch of warm bodies. But no, the hedonism, the hedonism of his self-prescribed healing process was his own weakness showing through. Nothing else. Nyahitha took part. Uh, Nyahitha took part. Nyahitha partook in the treatment as well, surprising Kyoshi with his indulgences. The former austere, the formerly austere sage pursued excess with the immoderation of a man denied. Karuk barely noticed his friends splitting apart, the treasure of his life scattered over the four nations to pursue their own paths. They'd all come to the same conclusion. They were accomplishing nothing of worth in the Avatar's company. It felt like one day he was playing his daily game of Pai Sho with Jianzu, and the next he was reading Jianzu's letter of admonishment for not attending Heiran's wedding. Heiran. Karuk had been out of his mind with grief when he showed up at Kelsang's with that poem. A spirit had tried to break through the day before, and his pent-up fury at himself for lying to Heiran by omission about so many different things for all these years exploded. He had annihilated the creature with the full power of the Avatar state, an unworthy act no matter the circumstances. The poem was a feeble attempt to turn back time to a point where he wasn't such a miserable failure who abused Yang Chen's gifts. An age where he was still within reach of deserving Heiran's love. He channeled his sorrow into more research with Nihitha, longer expeditions into the spirit world. He finally discovered how the tunnels to the physical realm were being created, his knowledge of beasts coming to the forefront once again. Animals often took over structures animals often took over structures created by other animals, like how jaguar beetles would live in the vast complex mounds of angler termites after the original residents moved on to form other colonies. The cracks in reality were being created by a single spirit. Karuk switched his focus to pinpointing the origins of the tunnels instead of the spirits trying to use them, circling closer and closer to the source until he encountered Father Glowworm. No. Yeah, no. Damn, you were so confident in your answer. No. I wonder if they're ever gonna mention. Yeah, obviously, Chandler. Jesus. Face Stealer? No. But I wonder if they're ever gonna mention Ko the Face Stealer in this book. My guess is probably not, because I don't think that's the main focus. Unless they mention it. I don't know. But yes. Karuk switched his focus to pinpointing the origins of the tunnels instead of the spirits trying to use them, circling closer and closer to the source, until he encountered Father Glowworm, the world borer, it within the hole. Finally, he'd found a spirit who would talk to the Avatar. He learned Father Glowworm had the power to rasp away at the barrier between the physical and the spiritual worlds, leaking wisps of its essence through the cracks it made to bask in the warmth and chaos of the mortal realm at his pleasure. Did it take the occasional human here and there? Yes, but the hunter didn't snatch up voice prey. Yes, but the hunter didn't snatch up choice prey when the opportunity presented. Let me say that again. Did it take the occasional human here and there? Yes. But what hunter didn't snatch up choice prey when the opportunity presented itself? Father Glowworm was a wise and crafty predator. It would create tunnels to any location in the physical world, but it kept the exits in deep, dark places where humans wouldn't notice and never lingered around the same settlements for very long. If lesser spirits wanted to make a go for the lands of humans using his abandoned passages, that was none of its concern. Karuk's mistake was trading names with it. Spirits with self-appointed names were incredibly powerful and dangerous. Yehitha had told him, and there was a power in introductions. Knowing Father Glowworm's name finalized the curse that had been slowly building upon the Avatar over the years. It dried the ink on the contract. Father Glowworm knew it too. The two of them were in it together for the long haul, the spirit declared. Perhaps they would have fun. Karuk, deadened with exhaustion, showed the human-eating spirit Karuk, deadened with exhaustion, showed the human-eating spirit his definition of fun. Their fight nearly created a gaping hole on the boundary between realms. Father Glowworm was stronger the other spirits, and Karuk was too stubborn to die. Their energies bit into each other like blades clashing edge to edge, leaving permanent notches. With a strike that nearly broke the foundations of the bedrock around them, Karuk wounded Father Glowworm grievously, the spirit diminishing in size and power several times over, but it managed to escape, wriggling away into an endless labyrinth of darkness. It was an outcome that Avatar found acceptable. The disappointing secret of Pai Sho most novices never learned was that, at the very high levels, half the matches between masters ended in unsatisfying, inconclusive draws. He'd done lasting damage to his enemy, enough to ensure the spirit would keep out of the human world for at least a generation or two. But it had marked him in return. Neither of them would ever fully heal from the encounter. They would know each other in their bones forever, like old friends. Kyoshi stepped away from her predecessor's memories gently, like they were pieces of crystal too delicate to handle. Unlike the communing session in North Chungling, where she'd watched his youth unfold by herself, Karuk had been standing beside her as they silently witnessed the horrors of his later life. There hadn't been a right time to speak to him. Still, she was grateful for his presence this time around. She couldn't have handled watching those memories on her own. Father Glowworm had scared her witless, back when she had met the spirit in the flesh. She looked at Karuk, explaining she had looked at Karuk, examining his strained but stoic face. By the time of his death, he would have been more injury than unbroken skin underneath his clothes. His appearance in the spirit world must have been altered by his own perceptions and preferences. He remembered a version of himself from before the worst days of his life took over. The metal around them had been mended and no longer looked like a broken plate. Why were there so many angry spirits during your era? She asked. She understood now that Karuk had only taken on the creatures that couldn't be appeased by anything but death. That's a question for another day, he said. In order to give you the aid you sought, I had to share memories of my avatarhood and Father Glowworm. Now that you remember this portion of your past life, you'll be able to find your boy in the physical world. Trust me. She found herself believing him. What about the rest of your memories? The words slipped out before Kyoshi realized she was crying. Karuk's jaw tightened. There's little to see after I lost my friends. Where was Karuk? Kyoshi had once asked Hosei, curious about what happened after their group had split. Traveling the world had been the answer. Breaking hearts and taking names. Being Karuk. It sounded like the water avatar had been living it up by himself, having one great adventure across the 4 nations. But the grief in his face right now told her differently. After the companions of his youth left his side, Karuk had been alone, surrounded by a world that celebrated him, perhaps, but completely and utterly alone. The man in front of her was a physically large person, but looking at him, she could only see the limits of the space Karuk filled. It reminded her of the way Jianzu's corpse seemed to shrink after the life left his body. Death and time made everyone small, reduced them to trivialities. She had no doubt her successor would look at her with skepticism, wondering why everyone claimed this Kyoshi person was considered a giant. I'm glad I finally reached you, Avatar Karuk, she said, meaning it wholly. Her shoulders hitched, and then they eased. She didn't consider he might have needed this connection as much as her, assuming a past life could need anything. There's one more thing I have to tell you. Karuk suddenly appeared reluctant, a change of mind taking hold of him. But I don't know if it's ultimately worth it. I don't want to cause you more pain. Kyoshi read his grimace and realized another flaw in Karuk's character. Outside of his bending opponents, perhaps he could not stand seeing other people get hurt. You might as well. Karuk sighed. You might as well. Karuk sighed. Come with me. They walked side by side. The unreality of distance and solid ground flowed to their advantage. A few strides took them out of the meadow and into the horizon, as if they were spinning the world underneath them with their feet. She forgot to observe their journey and take in the splendors of the spirit world. By the time she remembered to look for Kelsing's glorious painted landscapes and Kiri's talking creatures, they arrived at their destination. They'd gone from nightmare to nightmare. Karuk and Kyoshi stood at the tip of a drained, dead swamp. Excuse me, I needed to get that out. Karuk and Kyoshi stood at the tip of a drained, dead swamp. Trees that needed their roots submerged in liquid had withered into kindling. The slick floor of the basin had dried into dusty mud crack. She had an idea where the water had gone. A great gash in the earth had opened, splitting the width of the swamp's edge. The crack started small, then tore away from her like the beginnings of a great canyon cut into the desert. The depths were filled with the same wild, clashing, mindless color that Kyoshi had threatened to immerse herself and Karuk into. The creator of this terror had stood where they stood now. The point of origin clearly marked like a burst of outrage. Did Yoon do this? Yes. The spirit world reacts to our emotions. The wounds we bring into this place take on physical characteristics. Unlike the rupture you created, this one isn't healing. Your boy is keeping it open and festering by clinging to his anger. Kyoshi nodded. I know. No, Yoon's not in his right mind because of Father Glowworm's influence. No. You've held onto that excuse long enough. Karuk was gentle but unyielding. What I needed to tell you is that spirits can possess a human being's body, and they might even merge with a person to give them new shapes and forms. But they don't take over people's thoughts. Oh. Yoon is in complete control of his actions. He has been the whole time. Oh, Kyoshi said. She wavered where she stood. Oh. If Karuk was right about Yoon, then Zoryu was too. I'm sorry, kid, Karuk said. I wish it wasn't so. The sky, a clear blue sheen, began to whirl around her axis. clouds appeared from the sole purpose of marking her spiral. Karuk glanced up with a disappointed expression. Ed, what does that mean? Ed, Too late now, everyone saw that. Uh-huh. What are you talking about? I am the editor that doesn't do many edits. I don't do any edits, actually. Okay, back to the story, because I am approaching the final page of this chapter. Finally, this was the longest of the chapters. Goddamn. Karuk glanced up with a disappointed expression. Shame. Looks like rain. We'll have to cut the outing short. Kyoshi tried to speak and salt water came out of her mouth. It spilled down her chin and dampened her robes. She wanted to give parting words to Karuk, but her throat was thick with sea. Sun rolled her to her side, and the rest of the water came rushing out of her body. She felt the wooden deck of Sulon's smile pressing against her cheek. Captain Junho, Captain Junho and the crew ringed her, frowning with worry. It would be bad luck if an avatar died aboard their ship, even a foolish earthborn one. As Kyoshi lay there, she could feel the gift Karuk had given her. The battle between the previous avatar and Father Glowworm had left identifying scars on both parties, marks carved so deep as to be permanent. She and Yoon were the inheritors of that legacy. She could tell where he was. It was a faint presence, flickering at this distance, but in that direction. Yeah, it was a faint presence, flickering at this distance, but it had a direction. She knew if she reached for him, extended the flow of her spirit, she could follow him to his location. She had likely tracked her through the Fire Nation using the same method. They were each other's beacons, two torches in the darkness. And he'd used that connection over and over again to make her suffer. Kyoshi sniffed and immediately regretted it. She wiped the burning sensation of her nose. I thought I told you not to come after me, she said to Captain Junho. Several sailors were dripping wet like she was. The strongest swimmers must have fished her out. Junho had nodded. Junho nodded solemnly. You did. But that was obviously a stupid order, and we were never going to obey it. If only the world were filled with common sense people like the captain and his crew. She let her head thunk back to the deck and closed her eyes. How dare you defy your avatar, she muttered. And that is the end of that chapter. Oh boy, we will definitely finish next time. Definitely. She said the thing. Did she say the thing, like, later in her life? I don't remember that. Yeah, I don't remember her saying that. Oh, yeah, she does say it. Ah, I see. Well, okay, ladies and gents, thank you so much for joining me. Hope you have a good one. Goodbye.